It all began when young Meg fell hopelessly in love with a man. But he ran away, leaving her pregnant and disgraced. Her parents threw her out, and the whole world seemed to turn its back. Life felt over, but Meg endured. In poverty and loneliness, she fought every single day to put bread on the table and still give her boy love and protection. Years passed, and that boy grew strong, honest, and respected. He became master of his own land and earned the town's respect. But when he fell for a beautiful yet deceitful woman, it was Meg who first sensed the danger. She knew the cost of betrayal, and she chose to expose her son's bride-to-be for who she really was. Welcome to Weathered Stories. Today I'll tell you the story of a woman who saved her child not once, but twice. The first time, when, abandoned while pregnant and cast out by her family, she raised him through hardship and pain. The second, when she saved him from a fatal mistake, uncovering the lies and betrayal of a woman who looked like an angel. This is a story of a mother's strength, of loyalty, and of how even after heartbreak and deceit, true love and forgiveness can still find their way. If you're ready to hear how Meg and her son endured betrayal and humiliation to finally find home and happiness, then hit that like button, and let's begin. Wyoming Territory. The year is 1869. A dry wind rolls tumbleweeds down the dusty road. Wooden signs creak above the storefronts. Off in the distance, the Red Ridge Mountains fade into shadow. Sage Hollow is still a young town. Just a few streets, a telegraph office at the Cottonwood Station, and houses smelling of fresh pine. Here, every footstep echoes, every glance is noticed, and any whispered word carries through the whole settlement. Into this town walks a 17-year-old girl named Margaret Caldwell. Folks at home used to call her Meg. Once she had rosy cheeks, a braid to her waist, and a soft, graceful step. Now her shoulders are bent, her eyes tired. She clutches a small bundle of belongings and feels each mile pressing down on her strength. She was expecting a child. Sam Pike, the man she trusted, had ridden off with a cattle drive and never returned. No letter, no word. Only rumors that he vanished somewhere in the plains or found himself a different life. How could he leave? The question hammered in her chest again and again. But there was no answer. Her family couldn't bear the shame. In a small farming community, a child without a husband was a mark that never washed away. They cast her out without pity. She still remembered that evening. The cold gust of wind, the slam of the door behind her, the empty road stretching ahead. She walked until her legs felt heavy as stone, until the first lights of Sage Hollow came into view. At the boarding house, they hired her reluctantly. Too young, too pale, but her eyes were stubborn. She scrubbed floors, cleaned kettles, washed shirts until her skin cracked and bled. At night, under a smoky lamp, she stitched gloves, saving every cent. Her room was a cramped loft under the roof, a narrow bed beneath low beams. The cold slipped through the boards, and she buried her face in a coarse wool shawl. It was there, in that dim room, under the groaning timbers, that her son was born. The labor was long and hard, but when the baby cried out, Meg felt warm for the first time in months. She held him close and named him Tom. His tiny body trembled, his breath touched her skin, and for a moment the world no longer felt empty. From then on, her life narrowed to simple truths. Mornings began with hard work. Nights ended with quiet whispers to little Tom. She repeated the same words like a prayer. Keep your word, son, and don't ever give up. She knew his path would be harder than her own, but if he carried those words in his heart, he'd have a chance. And so, in the harsh land of Wyoming, among winds and dust, the story began. The story of a boy who would grow into a man, built on the unshakable foundation his mother laid with every word and every step. Tom grew up with hard work at his side. From the moment he could lift a pitchfork, he helped around the yard, carrying water, hauling firewood, pushing wagons stuck in the mud. To the neighbors, he looked like an ordinary boy. but in his eyes already burned the stubbornness he'd inherited from his mother. His morning started earlier than anyone else's. Just as light touched the ridge, he was driving cattle to pasture. His boots sank into wet grass. The cold wind stung his cheeks, but Tom walked steady, rope tight in his hands. Evenings, he mended fences, splitting boards, hammering nails, smashing his fingers raw against the posts. New blisters formed on his hands, and he wore them like a badge, proof that he could endure. There was no school for him, but he picked up old newspapers brought to the station and pieced letters together. Sometimes he asked his mother to read short articles aloud. She would smile and say, "You'll see, son. There's as much power in a book as in a rifle." Tom nodded, though what he loved most was plain work, feeling that the outcome rested in his own hands. One spring, when the snow melted too fast, the town was hit with flooding. The bridge washed away, the roads turned to swamps. That day Tom walked along the riverbank when he heard screams. A wagon with children had been swept into the current. Wheels groaned, horses reared, fighting the water. Tom dove straight into the icy torrent. The cold crushed his chest, his breath caught. He grabbed the side of the wagon, pulled on the reins, shouting for the children to hold on. The younger boy cried, so loud it drowned the roar of the river. Tom got to him first, pressed him to his chest, coughing as he carried him to shore. Then he went back for the second child. His strength drained with every moment, his arms shaking, but he never quit. Folks later said, that boy didn't back down. In Sage Hollow, people began to speak his name with respect. By 18, Tom could do everything a man of the West needed. He saved every coin, worked without rest. At last, he had enough for the first payment on land by Willow Creek. At the bank, he faced Andrew Beaumont, stern in his black coat. Tom stood tall, though his heart beat fast. He signed the papers and felt wings on his back. Now he and his mother had their own piece of ground. He dreamed of a house, not big, but solid, with a garden and a fence. A place where Meg could finally breathe easy. Tom looked out at the land by the creek, tall grass swaying in the wind, and believed this was only the beginning. The Cottonwood station moved to the rhythm of telegraph clicks and wagon wheels. The wooden boards flexed underfoot, the air thick with horse sweat, iron, and the smell of fresh bread women brought for travelers. Tom, his arms heavy with mail sacks, stepped under the low awning. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, spilling yellow patches across the walls. He dropped the bags onto the table and wiped sweat from his brow with his palm. Then he looked up. Behind the telegraph window sat a young woman. She was small and slender, dressed in a plain blue dress with a white apron. Her light hair was pulled back into a neat knot, though a few stubborn strands had slipped free and brushed her cheek. Ruth Miller lifted her gaze. Her gray eyes rested on him a moment longer than modesty allowed. Then she lowered them quickly, as if guilty for being caught. Mail for Mr. Hanley and the Brooks family? Her voice was quiet but clear, like spring water. For them, Tom said with a nod. His voice came out deeper than he intended. She reached for one of the sacks. Her fingers were slim but strong, the skin marked with small red lines from paper and needles. She worked hard, too hard for a girl her age. Tom almost told her that, but held his tongue. Why trouble her with his thoughts? Ruth carefully sorted the letters, laying them straight, corner to corner, as if order in the whole world depended on it. Then she set a cup of tea on the counter. For folks on the road. It's herbs, she explained without looking up. Tom picked up the cup. The metal was warm, and the heat ran through his palms into his chest. He exhaled, fighting the smile tugging at his lips. Thank you, he stumbled. The girl lifted her eyes again. Gray, serious, yet soft at the same time. Ruth, she said quietly. Ruth Miller. Tom nodded, as if he had memorized not just a name, but something far greater. Tom Caldwell, he replied, gripping the cup tighter than needed. Glad to meet you. The corners of her mouth trembled into a shy smile. For a brief second, silence hung between them, broken only by the click of the telegraph key in the back room, as if marking their first meeting. See you again, Mr. Caldwell, she said, giving a slight nod. See you. Tom answered, pulling his hat lower on his brow. He stepped out into the street, the wind striking his face. But in his chest lingered a strange feeling, like someone had quietly brushed against his heart. From then on, their meetings became a habit. Tom lingered at the station more often, and Ruth no longer dropped her gaze so quickly as she had the first time. In the evenings, they left town and walked out to Willow Creek. The water ran clear and quiet, reflecting the sky and the grass along the banks. Tom talked about the ranch, how the work never seemed to end, how many more boards he needed for the roof, how hard it was to get feed on credit. He spoke plainly, without complaint, his eyes fixed on the darkening sky, as if testing whether he had enough strength to keep going. Ruth listened. Now and then she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and nodded, as if his words were close to her own. "What about the garden?" she asked one evening, as they sat on a log by the water. "You once said you wanted to plant trees." "I will," he answered, his eyes drifting to her hands folded on her knees. "For my mother, so she'll have a place with shade and apples. She's earned her rest." Ruth smiled, her face softening, glowing. Tom felt the weight of his words hanging between them. He wanted to say more, but he held back. "Not yet. Don't rush." She blushed, but she didn't look away, and that meant more than any words. Sometimes Ruth helped Meg. If she noticed the woman was worn down, she would bring broth in a jar or a loaf of bread. Once she even took her place at the wash tub, standing half a day with her arms raw from the soap. When Meg tried to thank her, Ruth only shook her head. "It's nothing," she whispered, and walked away before any reply could follow. She did everything gently, sparingly, never in a way that would cause embarrassment. To Tom, those small gestures meant more than he dared admit, even to himself. In her he saw honesty and warmth, things that couldn't be bought or forced. Their friendship was cautious. In the evenings by the creek, he sometimes touched her elbow to steady her on the slope to the water. She would freeze for a moment, but never pull away. They spoke of the future in the simplest words: home, garden, work. And in those talks there was always silence, filled with what both of them were too afraid to name. It was friendship, pure and simple. Yet in every glance, in every pause, hope was already alive. Summer in Sage Hollow was lively. The town was preparing for the annual fair. Tents were going up, ropes strung for lanterns, women hung ribbons, and boys ran through dusty streets, checking where the first carousels would appear. People looked forward to the celebration, and to visitors from afar. That day, a carriage bearing the Beaumont crest pulled up to the North Star Hotel. Servants unloaded trunks bound in leather with gilded buckles. When the passengers stepped down, the whole room fell silent. Lillian Beaumont, daughter of a wealthy banker from Cheyenne, tall, slender, with a straight posture, as if she were used to all eyes on her. She wore the finest silk dress, a soft green, with lace the likes of which no one in Sage Hollow had ever seen. A peacock feather adorned her hat. She smiled lightly, laughed clearly, and her laughter rang under the hotel ceiling like a silver bell. Men turned their heads. Women whispered, "There she is, Andrew Beaumont's daughter." The murmurs spread across the room. The town talked about her that very evening. How gracefully she held a glass, how freely she spoke of Chicago and New York, how confidently she met anyone's gaze. Tom saw her at the fair. He was standing by the pens, choosing a stallion, when suddenly he caught the flash of green in the crowd. Lillian laughed, holding a candy stick, young men gathering around, trying to catch her attention. In that instant, everything in Tom's mind, debts, work, evenings with Ruth, faded away. He lost his caution, forgot restraint. His heart raced, as if the air itself had changed. He didn't know her character, didn't know what lay behind that smile. But he saw a bright light before him, a woman who seemed different from everyone else. He was drawn to her like iron to a magnet. She was unlike the others, as if she didn't belong here, as if fate itself had brought her to this town. Tom caught himself staring too long. Lillian noticed. She lifted her chin slightly and smiled right at him. The smile was deliberate, confident. Something inside Tom stirred. And so began a new chapter of his life, with the smile of a girl in a green dress, who flipped his heart with a single glance. Evenings in Sage Hollow had changed. Where Tom once sat by the creek with Ruth, now he appeared beside Lillian. They were seen riding together, she in a light dress, sitting tall and proud in the saddle, he next to her, seemingly blinded by her glow. The town whispered. Caldwell's found himself a match. On the veranda of the North Star Hotel, they sat under lamplight. Lillian laughed, tilting her head so the feather on her hat barely brushed his shoulder. Tom leaned closer, catching the scent of her perfume, unable to resist a kiss. Everything happened quickly, passionately, like a dream. He forgot everything else. Debts, work, quiet talks by the creek. One evening, Lillian looked him in the eye and said plainly, "If you want me, marry me. I don't want games." Tom froze. Something stirred inside, a memory of his mother, a reminder to be careful. But he pushed it aside immediately. "I will marry you," he said, without even thinking. Within days, the whole street knew. Tom Caldwell and Lillian Beaumont were engaged. Some were surprised, some envious. For Meg, it sparked worry. For Ruth, a quiet blow. Lillian noticed how Tom, passing the telegraph office, lingered for a moment, though he never went inside. "That girl," Lillian said one evening, leaning on the veranda railing. "The telegraph operator. I don't like the way she looks at you, or the way you act around her." Tom frowned, ready to protest, but Lillian's gaze was firm, demanding. "If we're together, you have to choose. Leave her behind." He nodded. It was the right thing. He had to prove he was serious. From that day on, he stopped stopping at the station. He no longer spoke to Ruth, no longer smiled at her across the road. It was as if nothing had ever existed between them. Ruth carried herself steadily. At the station, her voice remained calm, her movements precise. But inside it hurt. She buried her pain deep, refusing to let it show. In the quiet evenings, when the hall emptied and only the telegraph's tapping could be heard, Ruth carefully folded the papers, pretending all was fine. But her heart whispered the truth. He had chosen someone else. Their evening walks by the creek now lived only in memory, bright and bitter at the same time. These memories warmed her soul, yet burned from within. Meg walked into the North Star Hotel with a heavy heart. Tom was engaged, and she knew he needed a strong partner. She had to at least see this girl, to understand who was now by her son's side. She wore the best she had, a dark dress with carefully mended seams, a simple shawl. She tried to keep her back straight, not wanting to show how hard it was to cross that threshold. The hall smelled of wine and expensive perfume, and a piano played softly. Everything about it felt foreign to Meg. She was used to the scent of soap and wet laundry. But she approached the table by the window where Lillian sat. Lillian Beaumont immediately drew attention. A soft pink silk dress, gloves without a wrinkle, a confident smile, and a laugh that carried. She noticed Meg, glanced her over from head to toe, and squinted slightly. "What do you want?" she asked, without even attempting a smile. Meg stopped 2 steps away and bowed her head. "Excuse me for disturbing you. I wanted to introduce myself." Lillian leaned back in her chair and smirked. "You a new servant? Well, since you're here, start with something. Over there needs tidying." Meg stayed standing. Her hand shook, but her voice was calm. "I am not a servant, and I will not let you speak to me that way." Lillian's face darkened. She grabbed a glass of water and, with a swift motion, poured it straight onto Meg's chest. The cold pierced through her body, her dress clinging to her skin. A few nearby diners gasped. Lillian turned away, as if Meg had ceased to exist. Meg pulled out a handkerchief, dabbed the wet fabric, and took a deep breath. Inside, she burned with indignation, but her face remained calm. She turned and walked toward the exit. The evening wind hit her face. She paused, inhaled slowly, and held back tears. "Lord, why does my son have such a bride?" But she said nothing aloud. She only stepped further into the darkness of the street, keeping her head high. In the kitchen, a single lamp burned. The quiet of the house felt uneasy, as if the walls themselves were waiting for a conversation. Meg sat at the table, fingers folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the flickering light. She knew Tom would be home late, and she could no longer stay silent. The door creaked. Tom entered, took off his hat, and placed it on the shelf. Tired, yet his eyes still held that light that appeared whenever he spoke of Lillian. "You're still awake, Mama," he tried to smile. "Waiting for you," Meg answered softly. "We need to talk." He sat across from her. The lamp cast shadows on his face, making him look older. "I met Lillian today," she began. Her voice was steady, but her chest trembled. "Tom, she didn't accept me. I saw a coldness in her that you haven't noticed yet." Tom frowned, knitting his brows. "Mom, you're wrong. Lillian is kind. She's just not used to our ways. It's all a misunderstanding." Meg shook her head. "Misunderstandings aren't this humiliating. She took me for a servant, spoke down to me, and it wasn't by accident." Tom clenched his fists. "But, Mom, she's moving here soon. We're gonna live together. You don't understand. She's special." The word moving stabbed at Meg's heart. She closed her eyes for a moment, then spoke firmly. "Exactly. She's coming into this house. And if you've decided to bind your life to her, you need to know her true nature." Tom frowned, stood, and paced the kitchen. "And what do you suggest?" "I'll enter the house as a servant," she said directly. "Let Lillian think I'm nobody. Let her show how she treats those she considers beneath her." "No, Mom," Tom said sharply. "That's humiliating for you. I won't allow it." "Humiliating will be something else, Tom. If you marry a woman who despises people, then it will be too late." He stopped at the wall, lowering his head. Inside, feelings waged a battle, defending Lillian, respecting his mother, fearing a mistake. His chest felt tied in a knot. What if Mom's right? And what if she's wrong? Finally, he lifted his eyes. "All right," he said quietly. "But this stays between us. No one can know. No one must know," Meg confirmed. "Especially Lillian." The kitchen fell silent again. Only the wind whistled through the cracks, and the lamp crackled on the table. Two figures sat across from each other, bound by a pact that would determine the fate of the house and Tom's heart. The Caldwell Ranch on Willow Creek. The house Tom had built with his own hands. Light log walls, a wide porch, a horse pen, and barns for the livestock. It was his pride, his future. Lillian Beaumont moved into Tom's home as if she had always been the lady of the house. The coachman unloaded trunks bound in leather, and Lillian immediately directed where each should go. "There will be order in the Beaumont house," she said with a light smirk, walking through the spacious living room and letting her hand glide over the fresh floorboards. She had come with another person, Luke Rivers. She introduced him simply, smiling, as if it were already settled. "This is Luke, an old family friend. He'll help with the land and water papers. He knows the town and the people well. Things will be easier at the notary with him." Tom nodded. He was too caught up in the glow of his bride to ask any questions. And Luke, in his fine suit, with a lazy smirk and cigar in hand, fit into the house almost like he belonged. During the day, he would lounge in the living room for hours, and Lillian poured him whiskey herself, as if it were perfectly natural. That same day, the new servant arrived. A modest woman in a dark dress, eyes downcast, hands worn from labor. No one but Tom knew it was Meg Caldwell, the mistress of this house and Tom's mother. Lillian met her at the doorway. She stood tall, draped in lace, head held high. Her eyes swept over the plain servant's clothes, and her lips curved in a mocking smile. "Good," she said coldly. "The living room floors are disgusting. Take a bucket of lye and scrub them on your knees. I won't tolerate dirt in my house." The words "in my house" rang as if she were claiming ownership. Meg nodded, took the bucket and brush. Her knees throbbed on the floorboards. Her hands burned from the caustic solution, but she did not lift her eyes. Lillian passed by, tossing over her shoulder. "Do your best. They pay you for it, after all." That evening, Lillian showed her where she would sleep. Not in the house, not in a guest room, but in the cold pantry by the back door. A narrow cot with a thin blanket, damp air, and an old trunk. "I think this will do," Lillian said, without even glancing at her. "Servants don't need more." Tom remained silent the whole time. Around Lillian, he kept a stern face, as if agreeing with her words. But every time their eyes met, his eyes said something different: regret, and a silent plea for forgiveness. Meg answered him with a brief nod. She knew that if they were going to test Lillian, it had to be honest. And so began the days of trial. Lillian handed out orders one after another. Fetch water from the well, scrub the copper pots until they shone, serve dinner while standing behind her like a shadow. Her tone was always cold, with a hint of mockery. Meg endured. She gritted her teeth and did everything in silence. For her son, so he would see her as she truly was. The Caldwell house was asleep. The silence was thick, broken only by the wind rustling the shutters and the occasional shifting of horses in the stable. In the pantry, where Meg lay on the hard floor, faint light from a lamp in the next room seeped through the cracks. She had closed her eyes when suddenly she heard voices. At first, she thought it was a dream, but the words were clear. A man's voice, sharp and hoarse. "You're leading me on, Lillian. I'm tired of waiting." The reply was quick, annoyed. Lillian's voice. "Quiet, Luke. If Tom hears." "Tom," the man nearly hissed. "And whose child is it?" "Mine, not his. And you know it." Meg held her breath. Her heart pounded in her ribs. She pressed closer to the wall, ear to the boards. "I don't care," Lillian said coldly. "I'll marry Tom. He'll give me a name, the land, water from Willow. Then we'll both be safe." "Safe?" Luke laughed. "You want him to raise someone else's child. You're playing me, Lillian." "No," she said sharply. "We'll do it quickly. Tomorrow he'll sign the water papers." "Sign? He's not a fool. He'll sign if he falls asleep." Her voice carried a cruel amusement. "I have laudanum. I'll slip it into his whiskey. He'll drink it, and you'll get the signature. And in the morning, we'll go to the notary." Meg pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from gasping. Luke paused, then muttered, "What if he realizes?" "He won't. He trusts me too much. The main thing is to finish it before the wedding. Then it'll be too late to change anything." Meg closed her eyes. Each word burned inside her. It was true. Lillian was playing him. Tom was blind. He couldn't see. Lord, how could she help him? She memorized every detail. The child with Luke, the water papers, the laudanum and the whiskey. Her heart beat so loudly, she feared they might hear it. But beyond the wall, the conversation faded, footsteps receding. Meg was left alone in the dark pantry, fists clenched. Now she had the truth. Dangerous, but real. The next morning, the house looked the same as always. Lillian barked orders. Luke Rivers lounged in the living room chair, puffing on a cigar. His dark, expensive suit hung over the chair back, the embroidered buttonholes catching the light. Meg entered with a bucket and rag, pausing as her eyes fell on the suit. He tossed it carelessly. She bent as if tidying the table and spotted a corner of paper sticking out of the pocket. A prick of foreboding hit her chest. She slid her hand in quickly. A letter. Thick paper sealed. She unfolded it behind the screen where she washed. The lines were short and cold. L.R. Payment will be made upon fulfillment of conditions. Arson. Signature. Report. Do not fail. Andrew Beaumont. Meg clenched the sheet so tightly it nearly tore. Proof. Not just cruel words at night, but a seal and a signature. Paper that could crush their plans. She folded it quickly and tucked it into her bundle, tying it tight. Her face stayed calm. Years had taught her to hide her feelings. But inside, her heart pounded so loudly it felt as if Lillian could hear it. When she stepped out to the well with the empty bucket, a barefoot boy ran past with parcels. Meg leaned down, touched his shoulder. Listen, sweetie. Tell Sheriff Ellis to stop by the Caldwell house tonight. Say it's urgent. The boy nodded, tucked a loaf of bread under his chin, and ran off. Meg lifted her eyes to the house. Lillian adjusted the ribbons on her dress in the window. Luke poured himself another whiskey. No one noticed that the simple servant had just taken their weapon from them. Evening was coming, and Meg knew. The truth had to be heard. That evening, the Caldwell house was set for dinner. Lillian insisted it be city style. Porcelain plates, crystal, and candles in candelabras. Tom sat at the head of the table, restrained and weary. Beside him, Luke puffed on his cigar, and Lillian gleamed in her silk dress. Meg, in her gray servant's dress, moved quietly, serving dishes, stewed meat, bread, bowls of beans. She kept her movements calm, though her heart pounded wildly. Lillian picked up the whiskey decanter. Her movement was elegant, but deliberate. She leaned toward Tom's glass, and Meg saw her fingers slip toward the edge, where a small hidden vial lay in wait. "Tom, dear, you must drink to our future home," Lillian said with a soft smile, pouring the amber liquid into his glass. Tom reached for it, ready to take the whiskey. At that moment, Meg, as if by accident, brushed the glass. It clinked in her hand, wobbled, and tipped over, spilling whiskey across the tablecloth. Shards clattered to the floor. "How clumsy," Lillian snapped, rising. "You've ruined the evening." But Meg stood tall, looking her son in the eyes. Just then, the door swung open. Sheriff Ellis appeared, tall, in a worn coat, revolver at his side, eyes heavy with authority. "Good evening," he said. "Word reached me that something is amiss here." Lillian paled. "Nonsense," she exclaimed. "Who dares?" Meg stepped forward and drew the folded letter from her bundle. "I do," she said firmly. "Here's a letter found in Luke Rivers' pocket, signed by Andrew Beaumont." The sheriff took the paper, scanning the lines, frowning. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the crackle of candles. Lillian stepped toward Tom, reaching out. "Tom, this is a mistake. A forgery. You know me." He looked at her for a long moment, unblinking. Inside there was emptiness. Memories flashed. Her smile at the fair, her laughter on the veranda, her hands reaching for his face. And then, the cold words, the insults, the mockery of his mother, and now this letter. "That's enough, Lillian," he said finally, his voice low and hollow. "It's over." She went even paler, lips trembling. Then she grabbed her bag from the chair and bolted for the door. Luke followed. "You'll regret this," she shouted, her heels clattering on the floor. The door slammed, making the candles flicker. Outside, wheels clattered. The carriage sped into the night. Inside, only Tom, his mother, the sheriff, and a silence heavier than any storm remained. Tom sat motionless, as if trying to comprehend that his life had just changed forever. Morning in Bear Valley was gray and overcast. Mist hung over the creek, and the grass shimmered with dew. Tom stepped into the yard just as a young messenger boy arrived, handing him an envelope sealed with wax. The name on it stabbed like a knife, Andrew Beaumont. Tom unfolded the letter. His eyes raced over the words, and his heart sank. Due to changes in the contract terms, the bank requires early repayment of the loan. Failure to comply will result in the seizure of the Willow Creek land and water rights. He read it again. His fingers clenched the paper so tightly it nearly tore. Revenge. A strike back for refusing Lillian. Meg stood on the porch, watching her son. Her face stayed calm, though inside everything tightened. She knew cold calculation lay behind this letter. By midday, the whole of Sage Hollow knew. People whispered at the shops, in the saloon by the station. "Beaumont's demanding the debt. He'll take the land if the boy doesn't pay. Let's see if Caldwell can pull through." Tom returned home and dumped every coin from the chest onto the table. A few dollars, small change. He counted twice, then a third time. The sum was pitiful. He buried his face in his hands. Meg came over, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Hold on, son. We'll get through this too." He nodded, but his eyes were heavy, worn. Before him loomed a chasm. The debt, the land, the dream of a home for his mother. It could all crumble in a single morning. The night was dark. Gusts of wind rattled the shutters. Tom was nearly asleep when a scream cut through the yard. Fire. The barn's burning. He bolted outside in just his shirt, barefoot, heart leaping. The barn roof was already engulfed, flames clawing at the sky. Dry brush and hay ignited instantly. Water. Quick, he shouted. Ned Harris, a neighbor, came running with a bucket. 2 more men from town joined the line. They passed buckets from the well, but the wind only fed the blaze, and the fire devoured the beams hungrily. Inside, the horses panicked. Tom rushed through the door. Heat hit his face, smoke stung his throat. Coughing, he pushed through, grabbing the reins of 2 animals. One he let out safely, but the second, wild with fear, broke free and vanished into the flames. Its cry cut through him like a knife. Another horse's shadow flickered in the smoke. Tom lunged for it, but a beam collapsed nearby, sending sparks onto his hands. He jerked them back, skin burning. Endure. Hold on. He forced the horse outside and stumbled out after it, falling into the mud. Tom! Meg shouted, running to him. But he rose again, grabbing a bucket. Smoke hung thick now, stinging eyes and lungs, each breath a burn. They fought the fire until dawn. Bucket after bucket, wet rags, blistered hands. 2 horses were lost. All the feed, grain, hay gone in smoke. The damage was devastating. Tom sank to the ground, breathing hard. Blisters bubbled across his hands, fingers trembling. Meg sank beside him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders, holding him silently. Later in the house, she bandaged his hands with strips of clean cloth soaked in salve. Her lips whispered prayers, eyes dry but shadowed. The house still stood, but the farm was shattered, and the future suddenly felt as dark as the night sky over the burned barn. The morning after the fire was heavy. The damp smell of smoke clung to the walls, and a wisp of smoke still rose from the charred beams of the barn. Tom stepped into the yard, hands bandaged, moving slowly but steadily. One thought hammered in his mind: work, or everything will collapse. Ned Harris, the neighbor who had called himself a friend and helped with buckets the day before, was nowhere to be seen. The others, too, had vanished. Just yesterday the yard had been full of people, patting him on the shoulder, giving advice. Today it was empty. By midday, Meg noticed the pantry door was ajar. Inside, on the shelf where the cash box held the remaining coins, was nothing. Emptiness. The coins were gone. She called to her son. Tom, look. He entered and immediately understood. Boot prints marked the floor. Boots with nailed heels. The kind Jack Bannon wore. Jack wasn't just an acquaintance. He often sat at their table, ate bread, laughed louder than anyone, loved playing cards in the saloon, and always claimed he stood with Tom. After Tom's engagement to Lillian, he seemed even closer, assuring help with any task. Now he was gone. By evening, all of Sage Hollow spoke the same words. Jack Bannon has left. Looks like he realized the Colwells are finished. Heard he took the money. Tom listened to these words as he walked the street. His back was straight, his face stone. His teeth were clenched so tight, it ached his jaw. Returning home, he said nothing. He simply began working, carrying water with burned hands, cleaning the yard, repairing the fence. Every step brought pain, but he did not stop. Meg watched from the window as her son bent over the chores and realized. Now he had no one left. All friends were gone. Only she remained, and his stubbornness, the very thing that had always kept him standing. On that morning, Tom became a man completely. In Sage Hollow, news travels faster than the wind. Everyone already knew about the fire at the Colwell Ranch, the bank debt, and how things were going downhill for Tom. In the saloon, it was discussed over cards. At the store, while buying flour, even the telegraph operator caught whispers. These talks reached a man no one had expected for years. Sam Pike, gray and aged, had been wandering distant roads, scraping by with odd jobs. He carried the weight of guilt for many years, but now he finally decided to return. Hearing the name Colwell and the trouble in Bear Valley, he realized it was his son. That evening, Tom was fixing the gate, struggling with his burned hands, when he heard footsteps at the fence. He looked up and froze. A man approached, hunched, with streaks of gray in his hair. His face was lined with wrinkles, eyes weary. In his hands, he fidgeted with his hat like a schoolboy before a teacher. "Tom," he said hoarsely. Son, it was Sam Pike, the man who had once left, abandoning Meg with a child. Tom felt blood rush to his face. Rage mixed with memories surged. The cold winters, sitting hungry with his mother, her quiet tears at night, his fatherless childhood. Sam stepped closer, his gaze heavy with guilt. I didn't come empty-handed, Tom. I want to help. With work, advice, whatever I can. I know you're struggling with debts. Give me a chance, forgive me. Tom clenched his bandaged fists. His temples throbbed. Forgive? Where were you all these years? When mother labored to exhaustion. When I carried water and there was no bread. You weren't there then. Sam lowered his head. I was a fool. I left, thinking I could manage, thinking I'd come back a different man. But I've only returned now. And still, I'm your father. Tom stepped forward sharply, his voice hard as stone. To me, I have no father. Leave. Sam remained silent. Then he slowly placed his hat back on, bowed low. I understand, but I'll still be near. Out by the far corrals. If ever, if you should need me. He turned and walked away, his steps heavy and hollow. Tom watched him go, his heart torn, but his anger was stronger. He clenched his teeth and returned to the gate, burying his pain in work. Sam Pike disappeared over the horizon, leaving behind only a shadow of the past. One Tom was not yet ready to let go. After the smoke from the fire cleared and news of the death spread throughout Sage Hollow, many people stopped coming near the Caldwell house. Neighbors avoided the yard, and those who had recently called themselves friends no longer knocked on the door. The silence became heavier than any debt. One evening, as the sun was leaning toward the horizon, Ruth approached the porch carrying a basket. She knocked and entered quietly. Good evening, she said, trying not to look Tom directly in the eyes. I brought something. In the basket were candles, a jar of ointment for burns, and soup in a clay pot. She placed everything on the table, adjusted her kerchief, and offered a small smile to Meg. For your hands, Tom, she said, handing over the jar. This helps with the burns. And the soup. You'll need strength to keep going. Tom stood awkwardly, unsure what to do with his hands. He took the jar, but his gaze lingered on her face. Ruth, I was foolish. Blind. I forgot about you when you were here. I'm sorry. She let out a small breath. Her eyes glimmered, but her voice remained soft and steady. Tom, I hold no grudge. It's all in the past. There was truth in her words, but also distance. She didn't step closer, didn't allow him to touch her hand. Her smile was warm, yet tinged with sadness. Later, through the telegraph, Ruth secured an extension on Tom's payments and arranged feed on credit. She did it without expecting thanks, simply because she knew otherwise they wouldn't survive. Tom saw it all. His heart ached to confess again, to explain more. But he understood. For now, she kept him at a distance. He accepted it. The most important thing was that she was near again, even if that closeness came wrapped in the cautious, quiet sadness that lay between them like a thin, transparent wall. Evening at Cottonwood Station was quiet. The telegraph key clicked unevenly, as if transmitting something urgent. Ruth, tired but focused, leaned over the tape. At first, it seemed like a routine message for a military post, but the further she read, the colder her chest became. Red Ridge. Pay train. Raid in preparation. Suspect, Tom Caldwell. Ruth froze. Seconds stretched into eternity. She read the lines twice. It was clear. Someone wanted to frame Tom, make him responsible for a robbery that hadn't even occurred yet. She clenched the paper tape so tightly her fingers turned white. One thought beat in her chest. She had to tell him immediately. Otherwise, it would be too late. She ran from the station. The road to Bear Valley Ranch stretched across the field, dry grass crunching underfoot. Her heart pounded with fear and urgency. On the porch, Tom sat with his hands wrapped in clean bandages, repairing harnesses. He looked up when he saw Ruth, who reached him nearly out of breath. Tom, she gasped. I got a dispatch. Listen carefully. At Red Ridge Bridge, they're planning a raid on the pay train. And the telegraph mentions your name. They'll pin it on you. Tom sprang to his feet. A fire ignited in his eyes, as if the fatigue of recent weeks had been thrown off. Tonight, you have only a few hours. He nodded, without a moment's hesitation. I'll gather people. We won't let them get away with this. He dashed to the stables, saddling his horse while calling out the names of neighbors who could help. Nat Harris, Old Langdon, a couple of city lads, all who hadn't fully turned away. Ruth stood nearby, her heart racing as she watched Tom return to who he had always been, a man who doesn't back down. Be careful, Tom, she said softly. He paused for a moment, locking eyes with her. Thank you, Ruth. Without you, I wouldn't even know. Then, mounting his horse, he galloped off to rally those ready to risk everything for justice. A storm was gathering over the mountains. Heavy, ragged clouds descended lower and lower, as if trying to block the path itself. Lightning flashed across the sky, each strike illuminating Red Ridge Pass in a ghostly light. Tom was the first to mount his horse. His hands still throbbed beneath the bandages, but he didn't show it. Beside him were Nat Harris and two other reliable men, young Jim Calloway and an older, gray-haired cowboy named Hank Doyle. They asked no unnecessary questions. Time is against us, Tom said, his voice barely rising above the rumble of thunder. The bridge will be an ambush. We won't let them succeed. Nat, block the trail from the south. Hank, cover the west side. Jim, follow me. Understood, Tom, Nat replied, tightening the reins. They spurred their horses into a gallop. The road to the pass was treacherous. Mud squelched under hooves. Rocks slipped beneath them. The wind lashed their faces, tearing words from their mouths. Each step felt like a battle against the earth itself. Ruth insisted on riding with them. At first, Tom protested, but she stood firm. Now she held a lantern to her chest, shielding the flame from the wind. Her eyes burned with determination, though anxiety lived in her heart. As the incline grew steeper, Tom raised his hand to halt the group. We split here, he ordered shortly. Nat, take the trail. Hank, cover the slope. Jim, come with me to the bridge itself. And me? Ruth asked, gripping the lantern until her fingers turned white. Tom looked at her. His eyes flickered with concern, but also respect. You go on the deck. The engineer will have only a few seconds. If you make it, you'll save the train. She nodded. Her chest quivered, but her step was firm. Lightning split the sky again, and in its brief glow, the five of them, for on horseback and one fragile figure with a lantern, looked like a tiny squad facing an entire storm. Yet each of them knew that the lives of dozens aboard the train, and Tom's honor, depended entirely on their actions. The night erupted with the first shot. Echoes rolled down the slopes of Red Ridge, immediately followed by returning volleys. The air thickened with gunpowder smoke and the scent of wet earth. Tom, taking cover behind a large stone, felt a sharp blow to his shoulder. A bullet had cut through the fabric of his shirt and into his skin. He gasped but did not retreat. Gritting his teeth, he shifted his rifle to the other hand and shouted, Hold the bridge. We won't let them through. Nat Harris, hiding to the left behind a boulder, fired accurately in short bursts. His voice cut through the thunder. Two on the left. I've got them. Gray-haired Hank lay prone by the embankment, shooting with near-perfect aim. Young Jim trembled, but held his ground, his rifle joining the chorus of gunfire. The raiders, hiding behind a wagon stacked with brush, shouted to each other, trying to reach the bridge. Each time, they were stopped by shots from Tom and his men. Meanwhile, Ruth ran along the ties. The lantern in her hands flickered in the wind, but she pressed it to her chest, shielding the flame with her palm. The ties slipped beneath her feet, her dress snagged on branches, but she didn't stop. Just in time, just in time. In the distance, light appeared. The train was approaching the bridge. Wheels clattered. The whistle cut through the night. Faster, Tom yelled, gripping the rifle. The pain in his shoulder blazed, blurring his vision, but he refused to fall. Ruth stepped onto the tracks, waving the lantern desperately from side to side. The flame flickered in the wind, but the signal was clear. Stop. Danger ahead. The engineer, seeing the light, slammed on the brakes. Wheels screeched, sparks flew from the metal. The train halted just at the edge, where the bridge lay set for the ambush. At that moment, the raiders realized their plan had failed. They dropped their sacks, mounted their horses, and disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only the thundering of hooves and the smell of gunpowder. Exhausted, Tom sank to his knees. Blood soaked his bandaged shoulder, but his eyes burned with the fire of victory. The train was saved, and his honor restored. Ruth, gasping for breath, returned to him and knelt beside him. She grasped his hand, feeling his tremor, yet seeing him remain as upright and steadfast as ever. When the smoke from the battle cleared and the roar of the train faded, a commotion rose at the foot of the embankment. Two townsmen, arriving with the sheriff's squad, led the bound Luke Rivers to the campfire. His face was streaked with blood and dust, lips swollen from a blow, yet his eyes still flickered with defiance. Sheriff Ellis removed his hat, shook off the raindrops, and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Well, Luke, your game's over. Now you'll answer for what you've done." "I don't know anything," Rivers rasped, but his voice wavered. Ellis leaned closer, locking eyes with him. "You have two choices. Either you tell everything now, and we'll have a record, witnesses, the truth, or your path ends in the noose." Luke exhaled sharply, shook his head, but then broke. Words tumbled out quickly, as if he feared stopping. It's all Beaumont. Andrew Beaumont. He paid me. For the barn fire. For the ambush. For the water papers. It's all him. I only did what he told me." The onlookers exchanged glances. Ellis nodded to the townsmen, who began to open the sacks left behind by the raiders. Inside were the payroll bundles, neatly sealed. "All with witnesses," the sheriff said firmly. "Papers, money, your words. The picture's coming together, Luke." Rivers lowered his head. No longer a braggart and a gambler, he looked like a man who had trapped himself. Tom stood nearby, his shoulder throbbing with pain, yet his eyes never left Luke. Every word confirmed what he had long suspected. The enemy was not random. The threat had been in the heart of the town all along, in the banker Beaumont's office. And now the truth was out, loud, undeniable, before everyone. A few days after the gunfight at Red Ridge, Sheriff Ellis set out for Cheyenne. He carried with him the papers, sacks of payroll, and the signed interrogation record of Luke Rivers. The journey took nearly a full day, and all the while, the town waited anxiously for the outcome. In Cheyenne, the documents were placed on the district judge's desk. There was more than enough evidence. Luke's confession, the letter signed by Andrew Beaumont, and the money. By evening, word had reached back to Sage Hollow. Andrew Beaumont, the respected banker, had been arrested for fraud, arson, and orchestrating the ambush. To save its reputation, the bank was forced to revise the loan terms. The land along Willow Creek and access to the water remained with the Colwells. Furthermore, the debt was stretched over many years, eliminating the threat of immediate seizure. The mood in Sage Hollow shifted quickly. Those who had whispered by the shop just days before, saying, "The ranch is doomed," now greeted Tom with respect and nodded appreciatively. On the streets, people said, "Did you see? The boy stood his ground. Now that's a real landowner." Tom listened quietly. His expression remained stern, but in his eyes burned a calm resolve. He thanked only those who had not turned away in the hard times. Nat Harris, Hank Doyle, Jim Calloway, and Ruth. "Let the rest say what they want," he told his mother one day. "But I remember who stood by me when there was nothing but smoke and ashes." Meg nodded. For her, this was the most important lesson. Her son had understood the value of true loyalty. Cottonwood Station breathed in the quiet of the evening. The last train had left an hour ago, and only the wind stirred the curtain in the telegraph office window. On the porch, where their first short conversations had once begun, stood Ruth. She was tidying up papers, preparing to close the window. Tom appeared along the road. His shoulders still ached from the wound, but his steps were steady. He stopped right at the porch, took off his hat, and suddenly dropped to one knee. Ruth froze, clutching a folder of forms to her chest. "Tom, what are you doing?" she whispered. He lifted his gaze. There was no pride or stubbornness in his eyes, only honesty and pain. "Ruth, I was a fool. I left you back then, when you were there, helping us, believing in me. I chose the false glitter and was blind. Forgive me. Now I know, without you, I am nothing." He drew a deep, difficult breath, as if every word resonated through his chest. "I promise I will never leave you again. I want you to be my wife." Silence hung for a few moments. Ruth looked at him, her eyes shining. Her fingers clenched the edge of the folder, so tightly the paper almost tore. Then she could hold back no longer. The folder fell to the floorboards, and she rushed to him. She wrapped her hands around his head, pulling him close. "Yes, Tom," she said softly but firmly. "Yes." His hands trembled as he embraced her in return. All around, the sound of the wind, the empty road, the distant barking of dogs, faded away. There was only the two of them and that single yes, marking the beginning of their new life. After their confession and embrace, they stood on the station porch for a long while. Ruth's hands rested on his shoulders, as if afraid he might disappear again, and Tom felt her warmth, understanding that now everything was in its rightful place. But Ruth was the first to break the silence. She looked straight into his eyes, serious yet gentle at the same time. "Tom, I've forgiven you," she said. "I've given you a second chance. But there's something else, without which your heart can't be free." He frowned, not immediately understanding. "What is it?" "Your father," she said softly. "Sam came to you, asked for forgiveness. You turned him away. I know it hurt, but if you hold only anger in your heart, it will burn you from the inside." Tom looked away. Something constricted in his chest. Memories flared. His mother left in tears, his own childhood without a father, cold winters, hard labor. And that evening, when Sam had stood before him, aged and guilty, and he had told him to leave. "I can't forgive," he exhaled. Ruth placed her hand on his cheek, gently turning his face toward her. "I'm not asking you to forget, but I ask you to forgive. Not for him, for you, for Meg, and for us." She smiled, slightly sad but hopeful. "If I could forgive you and believe again, you can too. Give him a chance. Don't let there be a stone in your heart." Tom remained silent for a long time. Words stuck. Inside, bitterness wrestled with something new and bright. Finally, he nodded slowly. "You're right, Ruth," he said hoarsely. "That's the right thing. Otherwise, I can't live in peace." She leaned into him, and in that silent accord, he felt the weight inside ease just a little. A difficult conversation awaited, but Tom knew he was ready. Tom hesitated for a long time before heading to the distant corral. The weight in his chest still lingered, but Ruth's words echoed clearly in his mind. "Forgive, not for him, but for yourself." Sam was at the corral, fixing broken rails. He wore an old, faded shirt. His shoulders were hunched, his hands calloused. He worked in silence, as if trying to prove to himself that he still mattered. Tom dismounted and approached. Sam looked up, and a flicker of worry passed through his eyes. "There's work to be done," Tom said firmly. "There's shelter, but in our house, a word is law. Break it, and you leave." Sam lowered his head, fingers fidgeting with the edge of a rail, voice hoarse. "Thank you, Tom. I understand. I won't fail you." They stood facing each other, silence stretching longer than any speech. Then Tom extended his hand. Sam froze for a moment, then cautiously, as if afraid to ruin it, took it. The handshake was simple, firm, and masculine. There was no sentimentality, just the beginning of something new. Meg watched them. Her heart tightened. Then, for the first time in many years, she exhaled freely. Tears sparkled in her eyes, but they were tears of relief. A family once torn apart by pain and resentment was beginning to come together again. Not immediately, not easily, but with firm words and renewed hope. After weeks of hardship and long trials, Bear Valley finally came alive with joy. Where once the air had smelled of smoke and sorrow, now it carried the scent of fresh bread and laughter. The wedding day was warm. The garden around the house was decorated with lamps, their soft light falling in golden circles on the grass. Neighbors pushed together tables, arranging bread, pies, and bowls of beans. On a barrel, a shy boy from the shop played a simple, heartfelt tune on a violin. Only those who had not turned away in the hard days were present. Sheriff Ellis, Nat Harris with his wife, old Hank Doyle, Jim Calloway. They sat smiling, each feeling that this celebration was not just for Tom and Ruth, but for the house that had survived so much. Meg stood nearby, her eyes shining with happiness. Sam lingered slightly apart, as if afraid to intrude on someone else's joy. But when Tom extended his hand, he stepped forward and shook it firmly, a silent acknowledgement that the past was behind them and a new life had begun. The ceremony was simple. Tom and Ruth stood on the grass, holding hands. They exchanged short promises, but in those words was everything. Trust, faith, a willingness to walk side by side. "I will never leave you again," said Tom. "I will always be by your side," replied Ruth. Their first dance was to the quiet melody of the violin. They twirled on the grass, laughing. The light fell gently on their faces, and it seemed as if the entire day had been made just for the two of them. Love isn't about grand speeches. It's about actions in difficult moments. Forgiveness is the strength that restores a home. What do you think? Is it easy to give a second chance to someone who once walked away? Did Ruth do the right thing when she asked Tom to forgive his father? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, give a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for being with me. Until the next story, peace and kindness to your home.